Hello, welcome to class, everybody. Hello. Can you see me okay? Can you hear me okay? Get the important stuff out of the way first. Well, hello, welcome. We have a great class coming up today. We're going to be painting some tulips together, and not only painting them, but this is the fifth and final class in this series of lives I've been doing. And we've built them up slowly over the last 4 or 5 weeks. We started with watercolor techniques, going over them. We practiced the wet into wet technique. We've done freehand florals. We've done some water tangles to loosen up and practice those techniques. Today we're going to put a lot of those things together and actually paint a real flower. Now, if this is the first time you've been painting with me or you didn't have time to watch those other ones, I'm going to teach it so that you don't need to have seen those other ones. But I would encourage you after this class, go back and watch those lessons. The replays are up. They're available on Facebook and on YouTube. Definitely watch them if you have questions about techniques or any of the terminology I'm using or anything. I'm really excited about today because I'm also going to be teaching you my 5-step process for drawing and painting any flowers. Now we're going to go through it pretty quickly, but remember you can always watch the replay, pause, replay, restart. It's going to be great for you. We try and make it as easy as possible. So let me know, is this your first time here? I'm looking at the chat here real quick. I see Sandra said it's the first time. Hello, welcome. Hello, Susan in Florida. Hey, Lori. Diane's in Anaheim. Wonderful, wonderful. It is so great to see you guys. So great to be here with you. We have so much to cover today, and so I'm excited to dive right in. I have a slideshow for you today, okay? My type A is showing a little bit, my little type A planner. So I'm going to show you a slideshow. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing, and I have some interactive things to do, okay? So what we're going to do here, oh, I'm sorry, we have some spammers, so I'm going to ban the spammers. There we go. What we're going to do is I'm going to ask you some questions and I'm going to show you some photos of tulips, and I'm going to need you to be replying in the chat because it's a little bit interactive to start with. And then we're actually going to start painting, okay? So let's see. Let's get started with my little slideshow. All right. So my 5-step floral framework is a process I've developed over teaching over the last 5 years or so, that it's going to help you to be able to observe any flower, draw it, and paint it. Now, as I go through this is a great time for you to grab any watercolor supplies that you might need. We can use any watercolor supplies today. And I also have some great teammates in the chat, Rachel and Crystal and Sandy. So if you see those names pop up, they're on my team, and they're going to be giving you all kinds of links and helpful things there. Okay? So the very first step, anytime we start to draw or paint flowers, is to observe the whole. Now I'm going to pop up a little definition of what that means to me. When we're observing the entire flower, we're looking at what shapes we see, the anatomy of the flower, what elements, what characteristics, what colors, where's the light coming from, what's the texture like, and more. So here are some pictures of tulips, okay? I want you in the chat to start telling me some of the things you observe. And there really is no wrong answer here. You could be observing something tiny, you could be observing something big. And I'm gonna mention a few of the things that I'm observing as I wait for your answers to come in. So I see lots of different colors. So I know that tulips can come in lots of different colors. We have pinks, yellows, oranges. Some of the flowers have more than one color in them. I can see the leaves, right? What are those leaf shapes? How would you describe them? Are they little? Are they big? You know, talk about what you see there. Let's see. I see some answers coming in. Jeannie Pace said, I see a bowl shape, multiple colors, some transparency with the petals. The light can show through the leaves. Lori said, I see a soft color, ovals, veins. Yeah, there's so many things to observe. And let me tell you, when you really start to observe things up close and personal like this, the way that you look at the world is going to change. And I'll give you a quick example of that. My husband and I were on a walk yesterday, and as we were walking, we passed this agave plant, and he was like, "Oh, look at those flowers. Would you call that a bell-shaped flower?" And I was like, he's a data analyst, right? He doesn't necessarily know what shapes flowers are. I was like, I would call those a bell-shaped flower. It's also a compound flower, and it has a spike in it. So as soon as you start to observe things more and you're making that a concerted effort, you're going to be seeing things that you never even thought possible before. So step one in our process is to observe the whole. Spend a few minutes just enjoying looking at things and figuring out how you can, translate that into your painting. Okay, let's take a look at the next one here. Step one. Step two, identify the big shapes. Okay, now identifying the big shapes can mean a couple different things to different people. On the one hand, it could mean that you're identifying it in just that looks like a circle, or that looks like a triangle. Or it could be really, when you understand floral shapes, you're going to be observing specific kind of shapes. So for example, can you tell me any examples of floral shapes? Now I just gave away one of them. I said a bell-shaped flower, okay? What other kinds of floral shapes can you think of? And then think about how can you create those forms so that they look three-dimensional. And down at the bottom there, you see a little bullet point that says practice. That's really the key to all of this 5-step framework. After every step, practice a little bit, okay? So identifying the big shapes. Let's take a look at our tulips, and we'll also just talk about some of the overall floral shapes that you could have. I see Lori said there could be a trumpet-shaped flower. Jules said a cup or a bowl shape. Yeah, Chris said you could have an elliptical flower. There's star-shaped flowers, trumpets, funnels, cones, spikes, tons and tons of different shapes. When we look at the tulip, I can see a couple different shapes. The very, very simple shape I see is just a U shape, like the letter U. So right away in the back of your mind, painting a tulip or drawing a tulip becomes easier when you give yourself that guideline. When you say, oh, it's a U shape, okay? And then if we make it a little bit more complicated, I see some great examples here. Bobby says teardrop shape, Peg said egg shaped, okay? Or a cup or bowl shape. This is kind of like a cup shape, right? If you imagine a drinking glass or a teacup, kind of have that same shape there, okay? So those are a couple different ways that we are doing step 2, which is to identify the big shapes. Then we have step 3, which is to identify the smaller shapes and look at the characteristics. Okay, so let's think about what some smaller shapes could be. What do you think those could be? It's individual elements like leaves, stems, reproductive parts of the flower, the petals. And you start to think, how would I draw those smaller elements? What guidelines do I need to make sure that they fit into the bigger shape that we already did in step 2? So again, if we look at our tulip pictures, what about those smaller individual elements? So some of the things that I can observe here. Some tulip leaves have a little bit of a waviness to them. You can see that on the pink tulip there in the middle. All of the tulip leaves are very long and they kind of encapsulate the stem. Some of them you can see they're folding over. We can see the veins somebody mentioned in the petals. We can see maybe how many petals. So depending on what kind of tulip it is, it could have 5 petals. If it's a double or a triple kind of ruffly tulip, it would have a lot more. It's going to look different if we have a tulip that is wide open or a tulip that is not quite open yet. If you look at that yellow one on the bottom left, it's a tulip that's pretty tight, right? How about the stem? Okay, I see Stephanie said the stem is sturdy and bold. Yes, absolutely. The stalk, said Nasreen, is like a long, thin rectangle. You guys are killing this. You're doing amazing. So see how you're already seeing the tulips a little bit differently because you're taking a few minutes at the beginning to observe. And it's funny because it's not glamorous, right? If I said before every painting, I want you to take 5 minutes observe things, you're like, I don't really want to, right? Oh, at least I am. Okay, it's like if you're learning the piano, if I said, practice your scales for 5 minutes before you go, you need a little warm up. You're like, oh, that's not really the fun part. But when you do that, your painting becomes effortless. It is so much easier when you understand the shapes and the forms. Now, we're going to talk a lot about this during my free workshop next week. So this is the last in our 5-part series of live streams. Please register for the workshop. It starts next week. It's May 1st, May 2nd, and May 5th. It's completely free. And we're going to be going through that process with a bunch of spring florals. So we have chamomile and veronica, coneflowers, phlox, all kinds of little flowers that we're going to be diving into. And I'll have my team share the link with you in the chat. It's going to be on Zoom, so you do need to register so that I can email the Zoom link to you, but it's completely free and it's going to be really fun. So if you like this kind of structured learning where you really start to understand what you're doing and why you're doing it and what the structure is behind how we create a painting so that it looks effortless. It doesn't look like we spent 5 minutes talking about the form and the shadows and the light direction, right? But that's what makes your painting look incredible. Okay, so that is going to be on Thursday, May 1st that we start, and it's going to be so fun. All right, so step 4, we're going to start talking about actual technique. All right, I'm going to pop this up here for a second to show you. Step 4 is to choose your techniques. Okay, and so here is what I want you to be thinking about, because when you choose your techniques, there is not one correct answer. There's a lot of answers that are going to work here. What techniques would work well for the style that you want to paint in? So do you want to paint something that's very loose and expressive, it doesn't have a lot of detail? Or do you want to paint something that's highly realistic and highly detailed? The techniques are going to be different, right? So again, looking at the tulips, what techniques would you use for a specific style, okay? And remember, if you're not sure about techniques, we covered those in depth last month, and that replay is available for you. So I'll tell you, today we're going to be painting loose and simple tulips. To do that, we're going to be looking at the whole shape. We observed it together. We identified the main form as kind of that cup shape, and we can simplify the guidelines with a little bit of that U shape, okay? We talked about the individual elements where we have a long stem, where we have very long leaves that are bright green and really beautiful. Okay, so for the techniques today, we're going to be using some wet on dry, some wet on wet, and some blending. Okay, we're also going to need to do some layering. So we need to let things dry here and there and then come back to it to put some more paint down. Those are the techniques we're going to do, but there's no wrong answer here. If you were going to do a very realistic kind of tulip, you would adjust those techniques a little bit. If you really like the way it looks when you have ink lines or illustrative lines, then you can use pen and you can prepare how to do a line and wash kind of style. But I am promising you, if you take a few minutes before any painting to prepare and think through these questions, it's going to make your painting so much better. Okay, and our last step here is to combine and refine. And what that means is that over and over again, you are going to be thinking about the things that you've observed, about the characteristics that you've seen. You're going to be thinking about how you're going to adjust your techniques as you go. You start painting, and then you tweak a little bit, and then maybe you add another technique in, maybe you sketch the composition off to the side, whatever it is you need to do to feel confident so that you can go and paint something beautiful. Now I have a few questions here about today's project, and I'll tell you, the questions are great questions, but I can tell that we have some fellow overthinkers in the audience. So put your overthinking hat off to the side. You can use any size brushes today. You can use whatever colors you want. You can use whatever kind of paper you want. You can use any size paper that you want. It's just about going through that process and starting to get used to thinking about these things when you start painting, okay? What I'm gonna be using are a very light watery pink. I painted a few different tulips before class, but we're probably going to go for about this size. I'd say that's probably, you know, maybe it's 7 by 11 or 7 by 12. I mean, I don't know exactly because I cut this piece of paper off another one because we're not going to overthink things. All right. So I'm going to switch my camera over to my workspace here. And before we even get started painting, I'm going to grab just a simple pen and some printer paper. What was our first step? It was to observe, right? And our second step was to figure out those large shapes. So remember, anytime you can give yourself a little prep work ahead of time is going to help strengthen your final composition. So even if you just want to get used to drawing, you know, that tulip shape, right? Kind of a U like that, and we have our stem coming out of the center. Little sketches that you can do ahead of time are going to make it easier for you to paint the same shapes with your paintbrush. Okay, because your hand is going to be getting used to how to paint and how to move and that muscle memory, all right? So remember, we saw some tulips that were kind of wider, the ones that were more wide open. We saw some that were a little bit more narrow, right? The ones that were a little bit longer and maybe not open yet. And so just practicing some of these shapes a little bit is going to start to help you to understand how to move your brush when you actually start painting things, okay? There we go, all right? So you can practice that cup and bowl shape, and it doesn't even have to be hard. Now, if you're more advanced, okay, if you're a more advanced painter, if you're more advanced at drawing, you can really get into creating some three-dimensional shapes here and then starting to adjust them and tweak them a little bit, okay, like so, where you're really developing the shape of it. The cool thing about my 5-step process is that it works just as well if you're a brand new painter, and it works just as well if you've been painting for a long time and you already know some of these things. So what I want you to hold in the back of your head today as we start to paint is that general tulip shape, which is a U shape, okay? Some of the U shapes are going to be more tapered at the top. Like some of you said, it's almost more of a teardrop shape or more of like an egg shape. And some of them, you know, you can paint them a little bit wider, so it's still kind of a U shape, but the top is going out rather than in. All of those are okay because if we look at our photos here, okay, you can see all of those different shapes represented there, right? So remember, go easy on yourself. I know many of you are fellow perfectionists. It's about having fun, loosening up, and just expressing yourself today. So before class, I actually painted a whole bunch of tulips just to show you some of the ways that you can practice. You can practice individual kind of petal shapes and making those forms. You can practice different kinds of composition and different kinds of leaves. We have 2 tulips here, okay? Tulips that are very simple. All of these are painted with just a little U shape, okay? Tulips without a lot of detail. We're just kind of giving the idea of tulips here. Tulips that are a little bit more realistic, a little bit more detail went into them, some more layers went into them, and you can see all different sizes here. This is a little example of how I sometimes create the composition for my paintings. I'll just sketch a little square for myself or a little rectangle, and I'll go in there and kind of give myself just this little idea of how I'm going to take that and then paint something bigger with it. Okay, some of these I painted on the back of other paper, so just have fun with it, all right? Okay, so all of that being said, let's actually get down to painting, okay? I'm going to clean my palette out with some clean water and my paper towel here, okay? And we're going to start from square one, going over all of the prep work that we do whenever we start to paint. Now, like I said, you can really use any brushes and any size paper today. The reason is this. If I'm going to paint a very tiny painting, I can use a really small brush. If I'm going to paint a huge tulip, then I would need a larger brush. So the best advice I can give you when it comes to picking a brush is to pick the one that is comfortable for you and that holds a lot of paint and water depending on the space that you're going to be painting. Now we talked about that specific thing in our water tangle class, so if you didn't get a chance to see that, definitely double check it because it's going to be really, really handy. So this is a number 6 round brush. I'll be using that today, and I might use this number 4 round brush as well. Okay, now I have a little plastic pipette here. You don't need a pipette to do this part. You can use just a brush and clean water, but these pipettes are pretty inexpensive on Amazon, and it makes it really easy to come in here and add water to my paints and start to wake them up and bring them to life so that we can use them to paint. Now, even though I'm not going to be using all of the colors in my palette today, it's just kind of part of my routine and ritual to go in and put water everywhere there, put a few drops over here in the palette to mix things up, and then I'll pop that water up here. I also want to make sure that I have paper towels on hand because paper towels are a very important tool when it comes to watercoloring. We're going to use those lots and lots of times to blot our brush off, make sure that our brush has the right amount of water on it, okay? So let's just practice first. This isn't our final composition. We're just gonna do a little bit of practice. I'm gonna get my brush wet over here, make sure that it's cleaned off. It had some green paint on it, so I'm just gonna clean it off in the water. And remember what I've said over the last few weeks. Whenever I pull my brush out of the water, I'm always scraping it on the rim of the cup to get that extra water out of there. And I'm going to use some quinacridone rose today. That's a Daniel Smith color, and it's a nice bright pink. Okay, I'm going to add a little more water to that. I want it to be a nice pale pink. Remember how we talked about consistency of paint last week? So this is a very thin consistency paint. I also want to have a consistency of this same color that's a bit thicker. Because remember, a thicker consistency paint, when I drop it into an area that's been wet, it's going to spread a lot slower and I have a lot more control over it. So we want a thicker consistency paint here, like so, and this thinner one over here. And now we're just gonna practice, okay? I just want you to get your brushes wet and just start enjoying the process here. I'm gonna roll my brush around in it and we're gonna practice a few different tulip shapes. So a very loose, easygoing one. Remember, in the back of your mind, you're holding on to that U shape, okay? If you need to sketch it with a pencil, that's okay too. So here's with my brush, putting that down. I'm gonna grab some more paint, come back around, and I have this nice U shape, okay? And then I'm gonna just fill it in, and I'm gonna leave a few little areas of white, especially up here on the top half, because that kind of shows us where maybe some of the petals are overlapping and we can kind of see through them a little bit. So this is a nice little canvas for our tulip. Well, we have some of that thicker paint available over here, and so we can also do a little bit of this technique. 10 points to the first person who can tell me what this technique is that I'm doing. Okay, remember, the points are worth nothing. I just like to give them out liberally. Okay, so we're going to clean our brush off, dab it off on the paper towel, and I'm going to come back in and blend just a little bit here. We can blend those colors in. We can soften the lines between the darker and lighter. We can lift some of the paint to get a highlight area. Okay, and I see the answers are coming in. Cecilia says wet on wet. Teresa says wet on wet. Exactly. Wet on wet because the paint was wet, and then we put more wet paint into it. So now we have a nice darker area down here. We have some highlights, and we have a really nice looking little tulip there, okay? Well, there's other shapes that we could have done with that tulip. Remember, we also talked about having a longer, thinner one, okay? And that is totally viable as a tulip shape as well. There's lots of different varieties of tulips. I lived in the Netherlands for about a year, and I remember constantly having my mind blown about how many different tulip varieties there are. So it's not too hard to paint it as long as you're going for that U shape, whether it's longer or shorter. Lots of different ways you can do that. We'll do a little wet into wet again by dropping our thicker paint in. I'm going to rinse my brush off, pat it off on the paper towel lightly, and then with that damp brush, I can come in and kind of blend, can do a little bit of lifting. We get this really nice shape. You have other options, okay? You have other options. So here's another one. What if we did, I'll just continue in a line here, some really loose brush strokes, just like this, okay? And we're just bringing them all down into that U, and we're leaving the top kind of ruffled, okay? That could be a little tulip as well that's just opening up here. And you don't have to do the same color for your wet into wet. We can grab a little bit of a different color. I'm going to take this one. This is transparent pyrrole orange. Okay. I can take a little bit of that guy, pop that down at the bottom, and it's wet into wet again, but we have a couple different colors coming in there. Isn't that cool? A great color would be yellow. We could also do a green. You could do a really nice green. You wouldn't want it to be too watery or it would spread through everything, but you could do a nice green there that would come down into the stem. You can also take some of these colors and drop them in at the top. And the more you look at reference photos and kind of see what's out there in the tulip world, you'll see there's almost no wrong way to introduce other colors, to have different colors in your tulip. Sometimes they're really softly blended together, and sometimes they're really stark lines. Lots of different ways to do it, okay? Let's see, let's do one more kind of shape here. And this one, we're gonna have it be one of those wide open tulips, okay? Where we're really flaring it at the top and then coming down with our U shape here. Okay, and those kinds of tulips, those are those ones that have been in bloom for a while. You know them when you see them. They're not going to be lasting in your vase that much longer, but they're so pretty as they get that kind of full blown out look to them. And again, you can go in with all kinds of different colors. And when you're doing wet into wet, you can even start to give the impression of some of those decorative lines as you drop it in, just like that. Okay. Lots of different tulip shapes. For our lesson today, we're going to kind of be using more this kind of tulip shape, but practice them all and practice your paint consistency. Practice how you're going to create these, and then think about how your composition is going to look as well. Now, as these dry, we can go back in and add wet onto wet detail, add a little bit more detail in, but what we're going to do right now is I'm going to grab my watercolor paper that I have over here, and I have just this scrap of watercolor paper here, so I'm just going to trim it real quick so that we have some nice straight edges to it. And we don't let any paper go to waste around here, right? Especially when we're using the good stuff like this. So this will be what I use for our actual painting composition, and I will push this up a little bit, okay? And what we want to do is kind of think about where the tulips are going to go. So I alluded to this earlier, but a lot of times when I'm trying to figure out what my composition is going to be and what my project is going to look like, I'll take just blank printer paper and I'll kind of draw the shape of my paper on it, just like a little thumbnail, and try and figure out where I'm going to put the flowers, where I'm going to put things. So usually having 3 flowers makes a really nice composition. Okay, it kind of creates a little zigzag for the eye, right? Where we're going like this and like that. And so I think that probably will have our composition be 3 tulips in a little bit of a zigzag, okay? So using my brush, again, I'm using my number 6. You could use a smaller one if you'd like. We're gonna do just the very first layer of our tulips. Now you could be painting orange tulips, yellow tulips, red, pink, purple. There's so many different varieties, so don't feel like you need to use the exact same colors as me, okay? But I'm going to start with this nice pale pink color, come in here about 2/3 of the way up the page so that I'm leaving room for some stems down here. And I'm going to be painting that nice U shape, okay? Just like that. Leaving a little bit of white up at the top. I'll make that color a little bit darker so that you can see it better on the video, okay? There we go. Coming in there. There's our tulip shape. And I want to take some of the darker color. I'm going to mix it with some of that orange. We're going to get that pretty coral color and just drop some in here at the bottom. Okay, so we're going to have these nice multicolored tulips, maybe a little bit dropped in here at the top. I'm going to rinse my brush. Okay, pat my brush dry. Come in here. Now we're going to paint these together here on our composition, and then I'm going to pull this paper back down and we're going to talk about how to add more details, the stems and the leaves. But right now we're working on this composition together. Okay, so a little bit of lifting, right? And I'll zoom in even a little bit more so you can really see what I'm working on here. Okay, we're using the good paper, and I'm using the Arches paper. Okay, I always recommend using high quality watercolor paper, and it stays wet and workable a little bit while longer than the cheaper papers, the student papers. So you can actually go in and add a little bit more color as you go. Okay, and there is one of our tulip little heads there. Okay, remember, this takes practice. Okay, the first time I painted tulips, they looked wonky. They did not look like a U, but be holding these shapes in your mind, because the more you practice them, the better you'll be. Remember I showed you just a few minutes ago, I had pages of practice even from earlier today, because it's important when I'm teaching that I know what's coming up and what I'm going to be doing next. And so it just takes time and practice. And I will let you in on a little secret. Not everything that you practice is going to look good. Okay? If you were here last week, I gave you a little bit of a goal to work on in your mindset. And I'm going to say that same thing here as we continue to work on our tulips here. The mindset tip is this. If your goal is to paint something perfect, that is impossible. So when you sit down and you think, I want to paint the most perfect tulip, a better tulip than has ever been painted before, right? And you laugh, but it is true, right? Some of us really do think about things that way. I am a perfectionist also, so I know what it's like. If you sit down and that's your goal, you're not going to accomplish it, right? You're going to fail, and you're not going to feel good about yourself. You're not going to celebrate the fact that you sat down and made time for yourself to paint, that you're using the art supplies that you purchased, that you're doing something good for yourself. You're not going to be happy about any of those things. You're just going to be beating yourself up because it didn't go exactly the way you wanted it to go. So let's change the goal, okay? Let's say our goal is to paint something and learn something when we're painting, okay? If our goal is to learn something, then it's hard to fail, right? It's hard to fail because we are always going to learn something. It doesn't have to be a huge earth-shattering lesson either. It doesn't have to be, oh, today I learned how to be the world's greatest watercolor artist. No. The goal can be, I want to learn how to mix a really pretty peach color. I want to learn how to use green paint. I want to work on my brush skills so that I can paint better leaves when I'm painting. Okay, there are all kinds of goals, big and small. And if the goal is to learn something, then every time you get up from a painting session and you've learned something, you have succeeded, right? And that starts to feel really good. We feel like we're accomplishing our goals. If we're having fun while we're painting, we're learning better, we're learning faster. And so it's so important to be kind to yourself when you're creating, to spend time practicing without an end goal in mind, just to enjoy yourself, okay? So we have these really great, beautiful little tulips here. And I'm going to put this to the side, and we are going to let this part of our composition dry completely. And then we're going to come back in a minute when it's dry and work on adding some details to it, work on adding a little bit more visual interest to it, okay? So let me know in the chat, how are you doing? Okay, you ready to work on adding some details to our tulips? Any questions? You guys can go ahead and ask any questions. All right. And we're collecting those questions. I can answer them now or a little later. Now this part is going to blow your mind a little bit. So I want you to watch me for a second. If you need to finish painting your tulips for your composition, go for it. Remember also, you don't have to have a finished painting by the end of class today. You can go back and watch the replay. So you can just be practicing, all right? So here is a little thing that I think is going to blow your mind. If I take this same color that we used for our tulip, okay? And I look at the tulip and I start to imagine where the petals are overlapping, okay? So let's pretend here that there is a petal here in the front. I'm going to, and this has to be dry for this to work, okay? I'm going to put that same paint on my brush, spin it around to bring it to a point, come over here and draw the line of that petal in, okay? Just like that. And now I'm going to rinse my brush off, okay? Dab it off on a paper towel, and we're gonna soften that out a little bit so that that line is a little bit darker on one side. Okay, we can even do some wet into wet here and drop a little bit more wet paint in here at the bottom. Look at that. It's starting to look three-dimensional. Do you see it? Okay, I'm gonna do the same thing over here. We're just gonna show the tiniest little bit of another petal is happening over here. Okay. Look, our tulip has 3 visible petals now. Do you see that? What do you think about that? Isn't that cool? That's a form of negative painting. Okay? Where you're seeing a shape like this front petal and you're painting the areas around it to make that front petal pop off the page. Anytime where we have contrast between dark and light, we're going to start developing 3-dimensional form, okay? Tony just said you are flat out a painting magician. I like that, and I think I'm gonna add that to my biography, my little bio, right? Like when I sign my emails, Alex Kincaid, painting magician. That's a lot to live up to. I'm not sure I'll do that. Okay, so seeing this, right? It's gonna take you a little bit of practice to get this. You're going to need to look at some reference photos, go out and buy yourself tulips, take a look at them, but you're gonna start to be able to develop bigger shapes. Let's do the same thing here, okay? And I'm gonna actually grab a smaller brush this time for this one. This is a 0, and I'm gonna take this here, and I'm imagining the front petal, okay? I'm imagining the front petal. So I'm gonna paint around what I'm imagining. It's gonna take some time for you to be able to imagine that, see it in your mind's eye, okay? It's just practice, practice, practice. Soften that out a little bit with some water, okay? I'm gonna do the same thing on this side. And you're really just using whatever structure you gave yourself with the ruffles, okay? Little ruffly paintbrush strokes at the top. Look at that, cool, right? So cool. So we can do that over and over again on all these different tulips. Over here, I'm gonna do something different to show you. If this is a little bit too challenging, it doesn't have to be that exact same thing. I can just grab some of the paint I used before, and we can just go in and kind of just make some light brush strokes here. It doesn't even have to be perfect or looking just like a tulip, okay? It can be kind of this abstract idea of a tulip too. All right, so you can go in and just add some extra brush strokes just for fun, okay? Now, as these dry, you can also go back in and add some more wet on dry details. So here's my light pink paint again, okay? I'm gonna actually lighten it up even more so it's pretty diluted, and you wanna make sure that your paper is dry before you do any wet on dry, but you can go back in and add some little contour lines, right? Just to give it some texture and some shape. It doesn't have to be the same color. Remember, we saw a couple tulips there where we could really see. I'm going to grab some dark red, okay? And we could really see some patterns and designs on some of the tulips that we were looking at the reference photos, right? So you can actually go in with a color and really be painting some interesting visual designs on it, okay? Remember to get those crisp edges like at the top of these brush strokes. You need to make sure that you're painting on completely dry paper, okay? All right, so we'll go over to this little guy, okay, in a minute, and we're going to work on painting some of the stem and leaf shapes. But for now, I'm going to put that to the side. We're going to go back to our composition because it's dry enough now that we can work our magic creating some depth here with our tulips. So I'm going to make this just a little bit darker. We used a kind of a coral color. I'm going to mix some of that up here. That's going to be a little bit too dark. So sometimes if I know I've mixed up a paint that's a little bit too dark for what I want to use it for, I'll just pick up some of it with my brush and then mix it into some water somewhere else on my palette. Okay? That way you're not wasting any paint. You're just kind of spreading it out to use it even more. So let's go ahead and start to imagine where we're seeing some of the petals come through here. Right? So I can kind of imagine one here. So I'm painting that line in, rinsing my brush off, scraping it on the rim of the cup, dabbing it on a paper towel, and then coming back in here to soften that line out just a little bit. Okay, let's do another one. So maybe this petal is really quite large. Maybe we're seeing most of the front is that petal. So we can just paint a little sliver in over here on the side, like so. I can use a little bit of this darker paint that I mixed up and drop it in at the bottom where it's going to be darker. Just like that. Okay. I'm going to rinse my brush off, dab it off on a paper towel, and I'm going to lift some of that paint off of there to capture a highlight coming in on that petal too. Okay. Look at that. Got our little tulip. Heather said, my problem is that I can't imagine. And you know what? That's okay. It is going to take practice. And it's going to take some observation skills, right? Where, let me see if I can find, here's an example, okay? It's going to take some observation skills. I'm going to do this one kind of wonky on purpose, okay? So maybe I'm having trouble imagining where the petals are. And so I just kind of put one down here and when I shade it, something about it looks a little off, okay? Something about it just doesn't look quite right. When you find something in your paintings or in your work where you think, that's not what I wanted, like that's not what I hoped it would look like, that's not the goal, the best thing you can do is first remember our ultimate goal is just to learn something, right? The ultimate goal is not to be perfect, it's just to learn something. So when we look at this, what can we learn from that? Well, something about it looks off. What is it that looks off? Maybe what you have to do is spend 5 minutes, recreate that flower shape, okay? Just kind of loosely here, let it dry, and try putting that line somewhere else to see what happens. Or maybe you know right away, you know what? That line is in the wrong place. I should have maybe followed this line down from here. Maybe I don't know what's wrong, so I'm going to look at some reference photos and just kind of trace them and figure out where the petals are and where they're going. Now, the 5-step process that I've outlined a few times here, that's a process that I've used hundreds, maybe thousands of times, right? I paint flowers all the time. I teach lessons every month in my membership. So I'm always going through that 5-step process. And even now, I'll paint something and I think, that looks weird. And then I have to ask myself, well, why does it look weird? What is off about it? And it's going through that process. Remember last week we talked about variables in our paintings, changing the size, changing how many petals, changing the shapes. Well, that idea of variables comes into play when we're painting and trying to figure out our next steps too. Because if we see something that's a little off, we can ask ourselves, what variable could I change? Is it the shape? Is it my own knowledge of this plant or this flower? So I need to go learn a little bit more about it and see some pictures. Is it the color? Maybe I mixed the wrong color up. Is it how much water I'm using? All those different variables. And then as we tweak them, we become better artists, okay? So let's go down to this one here, and I'm going to come from this top, sweep down to the bottom like that, okay? And then we're going to soften a little bit again. And I'll let you in on another secret. What we're doing today is painting a loose, expressive floral, right? We have no traceable image. There's no drawing ahead of time. And this is by far the hardest way to paint, okay? It is much easier to paint when you're just working on your painting technique you've traced a really in-depth flower and you're just working on your different painting techniques. That is much easier, okay? Figuring out how to apply brand new watercolor techniques and get the shape right and see the negative space, all of that is so difficult, okay? All right, so we're gonna go in here for our final one down here. This one, I think I'm gonna do a little bit different. So see the white line that I've left here? If I follow that white line down, it gives us a really natural place to put our petal line right there, okay? And so I'm gonna clean my brush off and then just soften that out to the right here. And for this one, I think we'll only leave that one little petal. We're not going to do another one on this side, just to create a little bit of difference. Drop some darker, more concentrated paint in. Okay, like so. If you're enjoying learning about the process, about painting loose florals, please make sure you're registered for the free workshop that starts next Thursday. Starts on May 1st. We're going to be going over lots of different flowers, talking about that 5-step plan and how we incorporate that into lots of different flowers, okay? So we have 3 little tulips here that are coming along nicely. I'm going to take some of that same paint and just very gently put some fine contour lines down. We're just following the shape of the petals to make those contour lines, okay? We don't want it to be too dark because we're not trying to create stripes. We just want to show some of the, maybe the veins, the shape of the petals as they move. Okay, just a little bit of texture. All right. Okay, we're gonna let that dry. We're gonna come back in a minute to paint our stems and leaves. So let's head back to our little demo here. Talk about stems and leaves. When we were observing them, we noticed a few different things. We noticed that the stems were kind of thick, they were bright green, they're very sturdy, right? But they still can have lots of organic shape and movement to them. The leaves were kind of those spear-like leaves, and they could have some ruffles on the edges or they could be totally straight. What you need to think about is that the leaves are really big compared to the flowers. And so we need a lot of green paint. And remember, when we're painting wet on dry, like we're about to do, our paint needs to be a little bit more watery so that it can cover the distance on the paper. Okay, so I'm putting lots of water into my green paint, mixing up tons and tons of paint here. Okay. Susan Lutz asked, how can I compensate for paper that dries too fast? I'm using Canson. Wet on wet looks too harsh. Unfortunately, that is a limitation of student papers. So wet on wet as a watercolor technique, you really need to use good watercolor paper to be able to do all the softening, all the blending. It's hard to compensate for it. And that word that you use, Susan, is the perfect word, compensate, because the truth is, if you are painting on student paper, you're constantly compensating for it not being very good. And then when you decide, I'm going to upgrade and go to the good stuff, all the ways that you learned to compensate aren't going to work anymore because now you're on a whole different kind of paper. So it's going to be hard to do wet on wet if you're using student paper, but it's not impossible. You're going to have to paint fast. That's one of the main things you're going to have to do. You got to paint faster on student paper, and you're going to use a lot more wet on dry to bring your details in because it can look a little bit weird with that wet into wet. Okay? Now I know for sure, because I've been teaching watercolor for many years, that as I mixed up this green paint, some of you were like, hold on a second, what is that green paint that you're using? Well, first of all, I have a whole YouTube video just about mixing green paint, okay? Somebody from my team will pop the link to that in the chat. You can use any green, okay? Some tricks for green, I'm gonna say them real quick because I've talked about this at length in other videos. But this is one of my favorite green paints. The brand is Core, Q-O-R. It's Core Hooker's Green. And it has this beautiful range of light to dark. This is one of my other favorite greens. It is called Core Green Gold. And it's a very bright, punchy green. For many of you, you're gonna be trying to make your own greens. This is Phthalo Blue green shade that I'm gonna pull here into my palette. Okay, and for many of you, when you mix your yellow and blue together, you end up with a green that does not look like a realistic green. Does that sound right to some of you? We're gonna be talking more about green specifically in the workshop next week, so please make sure you're registered. But you get a green that doesn't really look like what you're seeing in nature. One of the top tips I would give you is to neutralize that a little bit. You could put just a little bit of pink or a little bit of orange in, and it's gonna make it a little bit more neutral for you to use as a green color, okay? Practice mixing. What you're seeing here in my palette is that I always have my green paints here. I let them dry and I reactivate them, and if I want to add a little bit more to them, I'll add more. If I'm painting with this color and I think that is too, maybe too bright, I want to neutralize it a little bit, I could put a little bit of orange in here. It's going to bring the color down a little bit, right? Make it a little bit more neutralized there, but I always have my greens here ready to go. Okay, so I see my team has also shared some of my supply links. It's really easy to mix your own greens. However, green is one of those things that frustrates almost every new watercolor artist, because when you buy the ones that are in tubes, they don't look exactly like you want them to look, right? They don't look realistic and beautiful. So then it's just a matter of tweaking them a little bit. So I have some green here. And I want to show you a couple different things about stems. If I use the same brush I've been using, which is a pointed round brush, it's a little bit tricky to get a perfectly straight line because your brush is it's going to wobble, okay? Just a little bit, it's going to wobble. So if you have available to you a filbert brush, which is like this, it's kind of squished on the side and it looks like an upside down U. That is usually really good for getting a nice, consistent kind of stem shape. If you have I don't have one here, but a flat wash brush as well is going to be good for that. But you don't have to, okay? If you have a filbert, it is helpful. But I would say I use my pointed round brush for about 95% of things. You just want to make sure that you keep a nice consistent pressure on it so that your stem doesn't look like this, right? Okay, so you want to keep a nice consistent pressure. Another trick is to rotate your paper so that it's in a comfortable position for your hand. So even though this is upside down now, if I fill my brush up here and I put it down at the base of this flower, and then paint the stem, that's a much more comfortable arc for my arm than if it was right side up here and I was trying to pull it down and come to the left, okay? So you wanna make sure that you're pulling the brush all the way down with your arm. You don't wanna just use your wrist because then you have a limited range of motion. So you put your brush down, keep your hand anchored to the table, and then pull it down and rotate things, because it's going to be easier in some directions than others, okay? So that's a simple tulip stem. And then let's talk a little bit about the tulip leaves. So I'm going to fill my brush up, filled with green paint over here. And what I'm going to do, this is how I like to paint big leaves, okay? There's a lot of different ways you can do this, but this is one of my personal favorites. I'm going to put my brush down and just kind of draw the outline of it here, like that. It's wavy. I know that the shape of the tulip in general is kind of a long triangle, right? It's much wider down here and much thinner at the top. What I'll do when I'm painting something big and I don't want it to just be one color is I'll then go dip my brush in water, but I'm not shaking it. I'm not cleaning it off. I just want more water on my brush so that I can come in here and start moving some of that paint around. Okay, lots of water. And you see, the more water we put, the more diluted our paint gets, right? And so we end up with dark areas and light areas, okay? And in this watery leaf, we can do some different things. We can grab some more green and drop it in with wet into wet. If I grab some green gold, I can drop that in directly. And because it's nice and wet here, I can be blending it with my brush. Okay, we can drop some more in. And I find that leaves are a great place to practice wet into wet like this and blending a couple different colors together because all of the greens basically look good together, right? The other way you could do a tulip leaf, if you don't want one that's quite as wavy, is to just, again, anchor your hand to the desk. I put the point of my brush down. I'm going to come up like that if we're doing a nice smooth one. Do the same shape on the other side and they're coming together. Fill your brush with water and then come in here. And you want to do this quickly because otherwise you're going to have those paint lines will dry and you're going to have the outline visible that you painted. So you want to come in and really quickly add in some more paint or water there. Okay? And there's a third way that's a little bit more difficult, which is I'm going to fill my brush up with paint like so. And I'm going to just keep applying paint here, building up my leaf with just brush stroke after brush stroke, just like this. Okay. So a few different ways to paint your leaves, to blend them and to move them with your stem. So all of that being said, let's go back to our little composition here and let's figure out how we're going to add some leaves and stems here. I'm going to fill my brush up with green and I'm going to rotate my brush a little bit. I'm going to put it down here, that stem come down, okay? Rotate it. For this one, I'm going to rotate it this way, put my brush down, and have my stem come down, okay? And then this one over here, I'm actually going to start this one from the bottom, come right up to the midpoint of that tulip. Okay. Lots of stems, and now we're going to paint some leaves in right on top. Nice and easy. We're not going to overthink it too much. Let's say we have a leaf coming off to the side here. And this is why you want a big puddle of green paint so that you can just keep grabbing paint, filling in these areas. Okay, there's no right or wrong here. It's just having fun, learn, expressive movement. Okay. And tulip leaves are fun to paint. They're kind of like the iris leaves where it's just big and bold movement. Okay. If you want to, you could fill in some more areas. You could lift up your brush when you get to a flower and then drop it on the other side and you can have a little bit of a leaf showing on the other side, okay? Just loose, fun, expressive. If you use a bigger brush for this, you'll get even more mileage out of your paint too, okay? Because a bigger brush can hold more paint. Okay, and we have some tulips. Okay, this is a great time if you have questions about watercolor, about the workshop next week. The garden studio reopens next week for the first time since October, so I'm really excited about that. The garden studio, if you're not aware, is my private botanical watercolor membership. We have new tutorials every month. We have live classes. We have a wonderful community of artists and painters, and we have So much going on in there, including an archive library of well over 200 or 250 hours of watercolor classes, all kinds of tutorials. And really, if anything today was confusing or you weren't sure of it, all of those things are in-depth lessons in the garden studio, from how to make leaves to the 5-step process to drawing tulips or drawing hydrangeas, irises, all the different things. And I'm just showing you again that it's okay to practice a lot. It's okay to have a lot of different shapes. It's okay to have a lot of different practice sessions. Okay? And here's another little technique. This is the painting we just did together. You can also use a paper towel to get some really cool textures in there too, if it's still wet. Okay, that's another little technique that you can add to your paintings. Tons and tons of things. Okay, so the garden studio opens again next week, and we have a completely free workshop next week. May 1st, May 2nd, and May 5th, we'll be doing live classes together. Okay, so before we sign off for the day, any questions? Any questions at all about anything? Anything. Watercolor, flowers, the 5-step process, the free workshop. I am here for your questions. Okay, also, thank you guys. I see Debbie and Deborah in the chat, longtime members of the garden studio. Deborah said it's the best investment I've ever made. I love that. It is super fun. You know, I sometimes feel limited as a teacher in a class like this that's an hour long. We have all different skill levels here with us, right? There are about 500 or so people live here with me today. We are all different skill levels, all different supplies, all different experiences with painting and creating, with mindset, with perfectionism, with all of it. And so it's really nice to have a place like the garden studio where I'm able to go deep into each of those things and talk about them and meet each kind of skill level and each area of expertise where they're at. So it's really fun. Make sure that you are registered for the free workshop next week. We're going to be painting all kinds of loose florals together. It's in a private Zoom webinar. We're going to paint these guys. I'm going to show you how you can take just one of those and make some really fun, pretty compositions. You can use these for bookmarks, for gifts, for all kinds of things, okay? Some more examples of what we're going to be painting next week. It's really fun. And I have some amazing giveaways, including, for the first time ever, I'm giving away all of my favorite art supplies in one huge giveaway. Now, I do lots of giveaways, right? I love doing giveaways. I will be doing a year in the garden studio. Somebody will win that. We have a very special prize, which is 10 people are going to win a private group painting class with me. But I'm most excited about this bundle of all my favorite things because it was really fun. I went onto the Blick Art Supply website and I went through all of my favorite things, from my favorite pencil sharpener to like my favorite kneaded eraser, all of my favorite paints, my palette, all of the brushes I use. There's even going to be a little pipette in it. It's about $700 of art supplies that are in this box. There's a couple different pads of Arches watercolor paper. It's everything. I am so excited about that one. That one's going to be awesome. So make sure you're signed up. Make sure you're registered. It is free. The replays will be available until May 9th for you if you can't make it to the live. And I think it's going to be really fun. Really, really fun. Okay? I see Nell just asked, I've signed up, but I'm unable to watch next Thursday. Can I have a replay? So the replays will be up on a private website that you'll have access to until May 9th in case you can't make it. Okay? All right, friends, I think that is everything. I like what Tanya said. She said, I've never liked tulips in the real world, but you made me appreciate these flowers, that they're not as stiff as I thought. You know what? I have to be honest, me too. There's a lot of times when I get requests for certain lessons and I'm like, really? I don't really like that flower. But then I'll spend time getting to know it and getting to learn about it, and there's always something that we can appreciate. One of the best things about the garden studio this year is that we've been doing the birth month flower every month as one of the tutorials, and it's making me learn more about and teach about flowers I never would have picked otherwise. So far we've done snowdrops, violets, daffodils, sweet peas, and in May we'll be doing lily of the valley. And so those are flowers that are all pretty, but I wouldn't necessarily have done a deep dive into them and learned how to draw and paint and teach them, but I've done them and it's been so fun. It's so rewarding to just learn more about flowers and learn more about things. Oh, there's a few other questions. You don't have to be in the US to win some of the prizes. The ones that are physical prizes, you have to be in the US, but I'm giving away a few things that are digital, okay? If you are already members of the Garden Studio, you don't need to register. You're going to be getting the link by itself. You're going to be getting the emails, no problem. Somebody, I think Karen asked, is membership yearly or monthly? You can do it month to month, or you can do it for a year. If you do the year option, you get the equivalent of 2 months free. Peggy, yes, the workshop is called Loose Spring Florals. Bobby said, Lily of the Valley, my birth flower. They are beautiful. So your birthday must be in May. Is that right, Bobby? It's coming up. And Penny said, how frequently is the Garden Studio? So I do a live class every month, and I also do a couple pre-recorded tutorials every month. Plus you have access to all of the past lessons, the whole library of things. And at this point, we're coming up on our 4-year anniversary. So there are lots and lots of watercolor flower lessons, let me tell you. Okay, Michelle, if you're a member and you registered anyway, that's fine. That's fine. Don't worry about it. You're going to get the links either way. Okay. Lori said, I'm still waiting for nasturtium, Alex. It's on the list. It's on the list. We have an Excel spreadsheet of all the requests, and there's quite a lot of things on there. So nasturtium will be really beautiful. I think did I sketch it out already? I might have sketched it out. I might have just done some research on it, but it is gonna be a lesson. Okay. Okay, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. It's so fun to paint with you all. This whole 5-week series has been super fun. So again, you can go back on my YouTube channel. Those replays are gonna be indefinitely. Facebook has a new rule that we can't have replays for longer than a month on Facebook. So if you do watch on Facebook, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel as well. And Rachel, could you put the link to my YouTube channel in the Facebook chat? Make sure you're subscribed there because the replays there will just stay up indefinitely. But we did watercolor techniques for beginners. We did a water tangle and I taught you how to practice. We did soft and simple flowers. We worked on wet into wet quite a bit because that is a challenge. And today we brought all of those things together and painted tulips together. So I hope I'll see you next week in the free workshop, Loose Spring Florals. And this is a great last question to ask and to end on here. Pat Schlosser said, how do you pronounce phthalo? Phthalo is a really weird word because it's spelled really weird. It's let's see, phthalo, P-H-A-T-H-L-O, phthalo. So many fun watercolor words, huh? Okay. Thank you guys. I appreciate you being here. I can't wait to see your finished tulip paintings. Make sure you post them in the Free Florals Facebook group. And I will see you on May 1st for our Loose Spring Florals watercolor workshop. Okay. Until next time, everybody. Bye-bye.